Welcome to Wachacha's Watchlist, the video show about movies that you can listen to like a podcast. My name is Sweetness Wachacha, and I'm just a normal fan of film, and these are just my opinions and preferences. Joining me today is Brian Easton, the author of the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series, as well as the host of Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter, which has just entered its 5th season here on YouTube, and you'll see a link below. Want to say hello, Brian?
Hello, everybody.
So you've brought a little gift with you.
Brought a bottle of Basil Hayden, which is a Kentucky bourbon that goes back to the 17th century, or the 1700s. I'm sorry. And the reason I brought it is because this is a well-known whiskey brand from the HBO series Deadwood from several years ago. And since we're going to be discussing westerns tonight, I thought it apropos, bring it along and have a little sip of the creature.
Yeah, that's something that he does on his show. That's how he opens his show. And I get to taste some delicious whiskey. It's very, very good, actually. I'm not a connoisseur by any means, as you are, but I do enjoy it. Well, enough preamble here. We are going to be doing our first of sort of a 2-part companion list type thing that I've done before in the past. And this one is going to be top 10 westerns before 2000. And there's a reason we're doing it this way. It's because there's a lot of, those sacred cows that people just love. And I don't really want to have just, these are the 10 that everybody already knows and everybody already watches. Although that list can be somewhat useful for people if you're not really into westerns and you don't know where to start. But I feel like this is the best of both worlds. We get to talk about some of those sacred cows, some of those best movies, and then we get to talk about some, newer westerns that are quite good that you should check out. So that's what we're starting today.
Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to point out, or kind of to make known from the outset, is that I am going to be differentiating between what is a western and what is a potential western as a period piece. So I've kind of limited my list to westerns that are set prior to the 20th century. But you have great westerns like The Shootist, which was John Wayne's last film, and There Will Be Blood is considered a western by some. I mean, there's a lot of things that are considered westerns. I mean, I've even heard like Star Wars being considered a kind of western, but that's not what we're talking about. At least that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about actual western films that people identify as westerns.
Well, that's a good jump off. Let's just talk briefly about what kind of makes a western. To me, the most striking, or kind of the pillars of what makes a western, kind of fall into 3 things. Number one, you have the idea of the frontier and chaos. Essentially, you have a lawless, chaotic land, right, and you have like the railroad is a big theme usually because it's connecting and civilizing and bringing order from chaos. And I think that's one of the biggest things. And of course, any kind of transition you have like this is going to it's not usually going to be peaceful. It's going to be quite violent, and that's another very large component in westerns, I think.
Yeah, so violence is a huge component because you have this lawless frontier. You usually have somebody or something trying to bring order, like you said, and so. And it doesn't even have to take place on the American frontier. I know I've got an Australian film or so on mine.
Yeah. Well, I think also it's kind of interesting looking at it, from its conception or through the decades, because we're looking like, in the 50s and 60s. I mean, westerns were huge. I mean, there were like lots of shows. I mean, you go through the decades, Gunsmoke. You've got, I think, and I don't know, maybe part of that is because it was so cheap to basically say, hey, we're going to build a western town, and then we're going to film 65 movies on this thing. I mean, I think that's got to be part of it. And then through that, you get kind of like these iconic actors rise out of this. Of course, John Wayne being one of the most famous actors of all time. Clint Eastwood, another one of the most famous actors of all time.
No, I mean, I think westerns along with war movies were very big in the 50s and 60s. And they didn't have zombie pictures back then. They had westerns, and that's what we had. There's so many great ones, and there's also a lot of that are that's not so great. And let's face it, there's a lot that we just haven't seen. So there could be an excellent Western out there that we've never seen, maybe we've heard of. But if it doesn't show up on our list, don't be offended. This is just our opinions. Like Greg's, or sorry.
That's okay.
That's right. Like Sweetness said. And it's almost impossible to judge anything like this objectively. You're going to have memories that are going to be associated with things, or where you were in life at that time, maybe who you were with when you first saw it. How many times you've seen it sometimes plays into it, whether you're tired of it now, or you just love it so much you could watch it over and over.
Yeah. I do want to mention a couple of things. Number one, spaghetti westerns was a huge thing, right? I mean, we talked about like the Americanized things, and spaghetti westerns, of course, being a lot of films being made very cheaply over in Italy, giving it the term spaghetti western. So that was a very large deal. Another thing is that a lot of westerns sort of took their root in Japanese cinema and the samurai movie, and there's a lot of direct, and probably some of those that come up through our discussion kind of came through, direct remakes of those samurai films, and those, like Kurosawa especially is one that's very well known for that. So it's kind of interesting, and I think over the years, in making these lists and things over the years, like I felt like, did America kind of fall out of love with westerns? And I had that idea in my head, and then as I sort of was looking, I'm like, well, because you have a sense of like not a lot of westerns, and this is kind of bleeding into the next list. That maybe America kind of fell out of love with that, or the world, but there's been a consistent stream of like.
I mean, it just has its ups and downs and its peaks and valleys. But the Western is always going to be. I think it's always going to be with us in one shape or another. One of the other like criteria for Westerns for me is the Civil War. Civil War, there's a lot of great movies on the Civil War. Some of my favorites, like Glory, The Beguiled, but these are not really Westerns. They're period pieces, and so for that reason, I've kind of stayed away from them. I mean, look, you can make a top 10 list out of Clint Eastwood movies. You can make a top 10 list out of John Wayne movie and be perfectly legitimate about it. But we're doing kind of a, just the fact that we're limiting before 2000 is still, it still was really hard to narrow down that list, So, anyway.
All right, well, you want to get started?
Let's get started.
Yeah, you want to give your number 10, please?
My number 10.
Put the old glasses on.
Okay, so my number 10 is one of those sacred cows, which is Tombstone. Now, I don't know if there's been a Western in recent memory that had so many quips in it, so many one-liners or memorable scenes. You tell them, hell's coming with me. By all means move. Say when. I'm your Huckleberry. I mean, it just goes on and on. But and I almost considered not even putting it on the list. But I couldn't do it in good conscience because I've seen the movie, a lot of times since it was. I saw it in the theater when it came out. Loved it, and it still holds up for me. And of course you can't beat Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, warts and all, Tombstone is a solid place at number 10 for me. So you may be hearing more from this in a moment here. Okay.
My number 10, it's an odd choice for me because it kind of embodied, when I was making this list, well, let me say what it is first. It's Duck You Sucker, Fistful of Dynamite. Okay, so it's funny because this movie sort of embodies a lot. This is Sergio Leone, James Coburn, who I love. But this sort of embodies the idea that like there's a huge glut of Westerns that I saw decades ago and loved or hated or whatever. And this is one that I haven't seen in about 20 years. But I'm going from my memory of how sort of over the top, but enjoyable this film was, and it's one that I kind of, unfortunately, you can't watch every movie again. But so my memory of it is not that well in terms of minutely remembering the details of the movie, just the feeling of really loving it. And of course, I love James Coburn; he's fantastic, and I know, and it's Sergio Leone who is one of the masters, maybe the best, right? And it has a fair amount of ridiculousness in it, with like you know, he's like this. He's an IRA guy who's remembering he has like the dynamite and stuff. And I just remember being very entertained by this movie, and it's one that I'd like to rewatch again for sure.
I always felt that film would have benefited from a better title.
Yeah,
you know, than that, especially by Sergio Leone. But I mean, I get why they.
I wonder if it's because it's 70s. Is it 60s or 70s? I should have looked up the.
I think it's the early 70s.
Yeah, I would think you're probably right, and I wonder if it was like. Because it really sounds like a exploitation movie to me, like the title. And I wonder if it was sort of trying to get into that wheelhouse or whatever.
It could be.
Yeah, but that's my number 10.
I grew up with westerns because my father loved westerns, Gunsmoke especially. But I never really got into his westerns as much. You know, the ones from the 50s, the one with John Ford and Sam Peckinpah, kind of took over in the 60s with the Technicolor and the. There's kind of oversaturation of color in some of those, you know. So that leads me into my number 9, which is The Long Riders. Now, The Long Riders is the story of the James Younger gang, and especially the great Northfield bank robbery up in Minnesota. And the reason why The Long Riders stands out to me as something special is because it is the first Western I remember seeing that didn't have that color saturation to it.
Oh, yeah.
It seemed it was dialed down a little bit, and because of that, it seemed more gritty. It seemed more realistic. The shootout that takes place at the bank robbery in Northfield lasts about 5 minutes, and it's just nonstop. And the action shots are fantastic. They do a lot of good slow motion. You know, people getting shot off their horse, being caught up by the stirrup and drugged down the street. And all of that was done in a way that made the Western seem like more nasty than it had been portrayed before. Yeah. Nobody was clean, really. I look back at it again, and it's still, for the time, you know, it was very... I thought it was very groundbreaking in the fact that it kind of portrayed people with dirty fingernails. Not everybody was manicured, with great teeth.
Is this the one with like the 4 sets of brothers in it?
Yes, and
that's the.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that the one of the things I like about it is that they cast Youngers, Coles, and or Youngers, Jameses, and Millers as Keaches and Carradines and.
I remember the Carradines, and that's
the Quaids.
Yeah, the Quaids. Yeah, that's right.
Randy and Dennis Quaid. And so and then they had Bob and Charlie Ford, which were also portrayed by the Guest brothers. So you have like 4 sets of actual brothers playing 4 sets of brothers on film.
Pretty unique, right? I mean, I can't think of another film like that.
Yeah,
really,
very cool. And so that's one of the reasons why it's on my number 9 on my list.
Yeah, I think that's like, I mean, that's what drew me to it, is the whole brothers thing. I thought, oh, that's such a neat idea or whatever, and so I remember watching that movie. I don't think it really resonated with me quite as much as with you. I mean, I thought it was fine. I wasn't like, I wasn't like crazy about it. But it is interesting that you talk about like the desaturation of color and stuff, and like, growing up and having these different experiences where like that kind of a movie, when you see that and it's like so impactful, and now of course it's everywhere, right? And just, but I mean, when that movie came out, I would not have seen that in the theater because I would have been too young, and my parents would never have taken me to see something like that. And so it's just interesting, like, to watch that happen. And now you look, like, the Westerns are full of cliches, right? There's so many cliches. But there's a lot of movies that started those cliches, and that's why they became cliches, because they were popular, right?
Right.
And so it's kind of an interesting...
They're cliches for a reason.
Was there any more on that one? No.
No.
My number 9, you have mentioned already, which is Tombstone, and it's very funny that you were like reluctant to put it on the list, and I as well was reluctant to put it on my list because I felt like it's okay. So it's very clean. It's so historically inaccurate. It's ridiculous, right? It's so clean and like Wyatt Earp is portrayed in a certain way, and it feels like it's very Hollywood, right? Like it's very, very Hollywood. It's not gritty at all, and that's generally what I look for. But man. It's just, I saw it in my formative years, and like, who doesn't love Kurt Russell getting righteously angry and going and hunting down the
cowboys.
Yeah, the cowboy. Yeah, and thinking back on the movie, I mean, like, it is chock full of amazing. You got Powers Booth.
yeah.
You've got Val Kilmer. You've got Michael Biehn. You've got Sam Elliott, who's, I mean, he's like the West embodied.
Charlton Heston.
Charlton Heston has a small part in it. Yes, he does. I mean, you just have so many people in there. Bill Paxton, he plays one of the Earp brothers. Chockville, and it is just, it's a popcorn. I mean, it's like a big popcorn movie. It's like you feel good about it, and it's just, it's very, very entertaining. And I went to Tombstone, Arizona one time. I drove out, out west there, and they have in the town of Tombstone, they have there's like a welcoming center or something with like a burial ground next to it, and they are playing like the movie just on like a 24-hour. It's kind of funny, but yeah. So yes. Satisfying, maybe not the most historically accurate, gritty movie, but it certainly does, it does what it needs to do.
It does the trick.
It does the trick, yeah. So, your number 8?
Number 8. My number 8 is Silverado from 1985. This was kind of a Western / comedy, but it really holds up on its own as a straightforward Western as well. You've got Scott Glenn, Kevin Kline, Kevin Costner, very young Kevin Costner, in this story of, a guy does his time in Yuma Prison. I believe it's Yuma Prison. Gets out, old grudges pick up, and I mean, Jeff Goldblum even makes an appearance in this movie. It's kind of an ensemble cast, really. Danny Glover is in it, and John Cleese is in it.
John Cleese and Jeff Goldblum in a Western. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And it's funny. Kevin Kline is hilarious as the guy who wakes up after he's been robbed in the desert and he's just in his underwear, and goes to town, finds his horse, finds his gun, finds his hat, all off with different people, and gets them all back. And then of course there's a lot of racial stuff going on with Danny Glover's character because his father has been run out of his home by the cattle concern that's out there, and so they're very righteous in trying to get that back and reclaim it. And of course Scott Glenn, one of my favorite guys on that. So yeah, for all those reasons, Silverado, number 8. Yeah,
that's interesting. So of course I've heard of it. I mean, it's a very famous Western, and it's one that I just has slipped through the cracks. So that's going to go on my watch list. I'm excited to check that one out because I have not seen it, and the cast sounds crazy.
It is. It's
pretty interesting. My number 7 or 8, excuse me. My number 8 is 2 Mules for Sister Sarah.
I almost put that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I was wondering if it was.
I was this close.
Yeah. It's. I mean, look. It's actually, I think, one of the best soundtracks. Morricone, of course, we didn't mention him at the top, but I mean, he is the sound of the West. Right. I mean, there's no. He's on the top of the mountain, and there's nobody on the rest of the mountain. Everybody lives in the valley.
He's the guy with the hat on the thing looking down.
But yeah, it's one of his best scores, I think. I love it. And it's a pretty typical Western. Clint Eastwood, Shirley MacLaine. It's very typical Western. There's nothing flashy about it that you're not going to. There's revolutionaries, Mexican revolutionaries. There's dynamite. There's lots of shooting. She plays Shirley MacLaine is like a nun who's teamed up with a much more talkative Clint Eastwood. Usually he's a lot more quiet, but it's just like a really entertaining Western. Like I said, it isn't really reinventing the wheel, but it's just a really it's kind of like embodying all that stuff that's enjoyable in the genre.
I have never felt so good for Clint Eastwood till I did at the end of that movie. The end of that movie just justifies it all.
Yeah. It's very good. Okay, so that was my number 8. How about your number 7?
My number 7. My number 7 is Quigley Down Under, with Tom Selleck as the titular Quigley. Now, when this movie came out, which was 1990, I think, is what I have here, the title leads you to believe that there was another Quigley film at some point, and now he's down under. Like there should have been a Quigley 2, Quigley Down Under, Quigley Goes to Dallas, but no, it's a standalone film with a title that could be a sequel. But Tom Selleck, as this sharpshooter, hires on with a cattle baron in Australia, takes the long voyage over there, and when he finds out that his job is going to be shooting Aborigines. And
oh, this is the Australian one.
Yeah.
Well, I've actually not seen this either, to be honest.
Oh, really?
So,
okay.
I'm quite excited now. I've got a couple of them.
Yeah. So it's Tom Selleck, it's Alan Rickman as the cattle baron, who, and Alan Rickman made a fantastic villain in any role he played.
Oh, yeah.
And as Marston, he's despicable, of course, which makes you just cheer for Tom Selleck all the more. Yeah. Now, it's not a serious film. It's more in the vein of Silverado, because there are a lot of funny moments in it. Along with a crazy woman who keeps calling him Roy, even though that's that's not his name. But it's got a lot of heart, I think. The story just comes out of nowhere and takes you by surprise, because you don't really seen this before. The cattle baron takes out an advertisement in papers all over the world looking for the best marksman, and he has people apply from every continent. But Quigley's the only one who sends his application in the form of a target written, and the shots are all grouped meticulously, and he writes awesome. From 5,000 yards, and he gets the job. But things go south when he finds out what the job actually is. But Quigley Down Under, check it out if you've not seen it.
Yeah, I plan to. That's a pretty cool resume, right? Like the proof is in the pudding kind of thing. Like here it is. You need to know anything else? No. But I do love. I mean, Australia is a very that's a whole can of worms in of itself. Like just that being a setting for a Western. Of course, there's one in the 2000s that I really quite liked that we might see on our list again. But it's kind of like an extended West, like it's very. I mean, but frontier aspect.
Australia, it's all West. Yeah. If you're not in Sydney or Melbourne, you're just in the wild, lawless West.
And there's a lot of parallels, of course. Like we didn't mention the Native American aspect of which was essentially a war, right? On and that's you could see the parallel with the Aboriginals in Australia. So there's a lot of parallels there, or whatever. So that's it's going to be one I'm going to add to my list as well. I didn't number these like I'm used to. Usually, that was your number 8?
That was my number 7. Yeah.
My number 7 is The Outlaw Josie Wales. Another Clint Eastwood. Is this? Sorry, I shouldn't ask it. Yeah. So this is another classic. I mean, it's got a very iconic, amazing poster. This is like Clint Eastwood again. There's a reason he's known for westerns. This is one where certain things like some people get really affected by one scene or one sequence in a film, and that stays with them, and that colors their opinion of the whole film, for good or for ill. And this is one where I just there's a scene when him and 10 Bears, and I think about that a lot for some reason. It's one that always that sequence sticks with me, and I love that whole thing. And it's a pretty standard, again, it's what you're going to expect for most of these westerns. It's but this particular one, like I said, I really like that sequence. And it really closes the whole film for me. So I really like that whole thing. And so, and again, this is another one I haven't seen in probably 2 decades. And I remember that, really loving that whole thing. So, that's The Outlaw Josie Wales.
Yeah, and we'll be revisiting that.
Yeah, I figured I got the sense that was the case there. So I figured I shouldn't say too much, give you a little bit on there too.
So my number, what is this, number 6? Yeah, so my number 6 is The Mountain Men. And I don't know how many people have seen this.
I've never even heard of this.
So this is Charlton Heston and Brian Keith are mountain men. I'm
sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute there, Brian, because this whiskey is absolutely delicious. Good, I'm not much of a drinker, but I'm going to have a little more. Shall I?
It's that dark rye,
Give you a little more.
Just a little bit more. Yeah, that's good. Freshen up.
So I didn't mean to interrupt you. Mountain Men.
Yeah. So 1980, and the posters for this kind of give you conflicting ideas of what the film is about, because there's a very comical poster that was done by a cartoonist, and I don't remember his name, but he was a famous cartoonist, and it has these 2 caricatures of mountain men running for their lives, with arrows being shot at them.
Well, you can see it on the screen here. I'll put it up for you.
And then there are other posters which are completely serious, and this film could be taken either way, because Brian Keith delivers some just really sarcastic, funny lines in this. And basically you've got 2 mountain men who are making their living. One makes his living as a trapper, the other makes his living hauling supplies in from St. Louis. And one of them has their Native American bride stolen from them by the tribe that she came from. And so they're trying to get her back, and they have all these, there are mishaps and misadventures. I will say one thing about The Mountain Men. If you go and see it on my recommendation, just be prepared. The handling of the Native Americans is atrocious. Oh, yeah. It's very bad. I mean, it's not even good by the standards of the day.
Yeah.
Okay? It's terrible. But somehow Charlton Heston and Brian Keith and their chemistry together bring it out of that kind of a slump. There was a time when I watched this thing like at least once a month.
Yeah.
On VHS. So yeah, I don't know how many people have heard of it, but
I've never even heard of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. My number, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. My number 6 is this is an oddball one for me to put on here because it kind of violates our rules. And this is Last Man Standing. Now, this does take place in the 20s, so it really is a little bit weird. But here's the deal with this. Kurosawa, one of his best films, one of my favorite movies of all time, is Yojimbo. And this movie has been redone as Fistful of Dollars, and then now again later on by Walter Hill, who's one of my favorite directors, as Last Man Standing. So it's the same story, it has the same elements, and it really resonates as well. So it's a little bit of a cheat, I think, but it's one of my, Yojimbo is my favorite iteration of this story, again, having been told many times. But since we're doing the Americanized versions here, I'm going with Last Man Standing, which I love the visceral violence of it, the way, and this is actually Dashiell Hammett book. I think it's actually, because I read the book I think it's Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett, and I think that's where all this is pulled from, essentially. So it's a great book, but I love that whole pitting the gangs in the town against each other. And again, Walter Hill is a phenomenal director that I love, and so his handling of this story I find quite enjoyable. So it's that's a little fudge one I've gotten on my list. So have you seen this?
Oh yeah, I love Last Man Standing. Bruce Willis is he's unstoppable. Until he loses his pistols. And then you feel really bad for him.
Well, I think it's because Yojimbo, Fistful of Dollars, and Last Man Standing all rooted in that Red Harvest novel, and all those kind of, which is film noir. I mean, that's like a gumshoe detective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all those have an element of some point. Well, I shouldn't say all of them, where they get the private dick gets pummeled a bunch. There's always a moment where they're on the wrong end of the beating. So, and that's kind of what you see in there. So yeah, very enjoyable. Last Man Standing. That's my
and very west. I mean, it's out in the middle of nowhere wherever this takes place.
It does take place, I believe, from what memory serves, the 20s. So
it's like Oklahoma or something. I think, isn't it? All right.
Number 5.
And number 5 was a contender. You got to put these in order. It's really tough to rank them, but my number 5 is Unforgiven.
Yeah.
With Clint Eastwood. It was one of his last westerns, if not his last western, that he made. And like I said before, I could have populated a top 10 list with Clint Eastwood movies because all his westerns I love. But Unforgiven has a special place with me because I didn't like it the first time I saw it. I'm used to seeing Clint Eastwood as a gunslinger, as the Man with No Name, or Blondie, or the preacher from Pale Rider. You don't mess with him. He will gun you down. And here we open up, and here's Clint Eastwood falling in pig slop and can't hit the broadside of a barn, with his pistol. And he gets beat up by the local sheriff, who is Gene Hackman, which is always fantastic to watch. And so I didn't like it because I felt like my, one of my cinematic heroes had been violated, But that end piece where he comes back and you come to realize that it's the alcohol, it's the booze that has fueled the villainy in William Money all this time, and he hasn't had a drop in so long, so he's pretty much neutered. But when it comes time to stand up for his murdered friend, played by, the redoubtable Morgan Freeman, who was fantastic as well, he hits the bottle again, and that demon comes back. And at the end, you get some of the most iconic lines, it's like, Gene Hackman's character says to him, you'd be William Money out of Missouri, killer of women and children. And he's holding the scattergun on him, and he says, yeah, I've killed women and children. and I'm here to kill you.
He says, I've killed women and children, I've killed everything that's walked and crawled at some point or another, and now I'm here to kill you.
Yeah, and how bad would you... I mean, it's like, whatever you meant to do in that, you just lost the game.
You know that meme of that kid that's like, that's me right now trying not to quote like every line of the movie. Well, you're definitely going to hear about this movie from me, but I'll oh, sorry, do you want to say anything else?
No, I'll save the rest. I'll save the rest for you.
My number 5 is the sequel to the movie that just mentioned, which is For a Few Dollars More. This is actually a little more controversial, maybe, I don't know, because this is my favorite out of that trilogy.
Good, Bad, and the Ugly.
Good, Bad, and the So the Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and Good, Bad, and the Ugly. And I personally, although I think the gunfight at the end of Good, Bad, and the Ugly, I don't know if it's on your list, is such an awesome thing. It's my least favorite as a whole film. And so I like, Lee Van Cleef is in this, Clint Eastwood, of course. This is my favorite of that trilogy, The Man with the No Name trilogy. So yeah, I just really like his character. I like him, I like his character and his contribution to the movie and the way that they play off each other. So it's not just like sort of like, hey, I'm like the master of this, you know what I mean? Like Clint Eastwood is just like, I'm the best, you're not beating me, and this is sort of like provides a little bit of a foil to him, and I quite like that. So yeah, this is my favorite of that iconic trilogy.
That trilogy, yeah, that's so you know, you could put 3 notches bang on your list just with those 3. You know, if you wanted to.
So yeah, that's For a Few Dollars More.
Oh, For a Few Dollars More. Okay,
yeah, that's the second one. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
High Plains Drifter was another. Cut that part out.
That's okay.
So my number 4 is not a film. It was a TV event, which was Lonesome Dove.
Yeah, I knew this was going to be on the list, actually.
Yeah. Lonesome Dove is a 6-hour sweeping romantic epic of the West, and you know, Tommy Lee Jones as Tommy Lee Jones as Captain Call, and Robert Duvall as Captain McCrae, Robert Urich, Diane Lane, Angelica Houston, Danny Glover. It's really a great cast, and I watched. I mean, like I said, it's the 6 hours. It aired over a period of a week or so on network television. But man, did they change the landscape of the Western with that one? And of course, it's from the novel by Larry McMurtry.
So sorry to interrupt you. Did you read the book first, or did you watch the movie first?
I have actually still not read the book.
Oh, okay.
I have tried to read the book a couple of times, and I just haven't been able to get through it. It's one of these, I probably never will read it. The movie kind of stands alone for me, and I'm sure the book is better. Everybody who's read it has told me they like the book better. Yeah, Lonesome Dove, just for its sheer, the scope of it over the years, and of course, you know, you can't fade Robert Duvall or Tommy Lee Jones. So
I'm now going to tell you that the book was better. I'm going to be the last in the long line of people who do so. So it's an enjoyable miniseries for sure. But to me, like, you know, and I don't want to get on the rabbit hole because you and I love Blood. I think it's safe to say that Blood Meridian for me is my favorite book of all time, and I think
me too.
You should. Okay, so. Lonesome Dove as a novel is incredible, and that's sort of more of the romanticized view of the West, and Blood Meridian is sort of like the gritty look at the West.
It came out the same year, and
yeah, they're sort of capping off the spectrum, as it were, of like, and so those 2 novels are to me incredible. And so watching the Lonesome Dove movies / TV, whatever you want to call it, was enjoyable, but also, I think for me, like, it was very effective, you know, much less effective than the book was for me. And, you know, I fall victim in that quite a bit, where I'm like, you know, I'm like that guy that's like, well, the book was better, you know. And like, nobody likes that guy, but unfortunately, I am that guy. So I try to be respectful about it, but yeah. So, but I mean, it was good casting and stuff, but you know, the story itself is definitely really awesome. I mean, there's some elements, not to give away, but like, there's some very interesting elements to the story, you know?
In the book.
And, just the story in general, and you know, I think Augustus
McCrae.
but what's the actor?
Robert Duvall.
Robert Duvall. Yeah, thank you. Robert Duvall he's perfect in that role, and he's been in a lot of really good westerns.
Yeah,
actually,
he really has.
Yeah,
he's.
Yeah, I really like him. And for some reason, I can never remember Robert Duvall's name, no matter if he's been in The Godfather or something like that. For some reason, I'm forever saying, what's his name again?
What's that guy's name?
I don't know why I can't ever remember. Shall we? Can we go on to the next one? Or you want me to say anything else?
Oh, yeah. So, go ahead.
My number 4 was just mentioned by Brian here, and that is The High Plains Drifter. Now, this is one, it's another Clint Eastwood Western, but it's very atypical. So this is one that I would urge you, if you do not know it, I would urge you to go in blind. Because this movie, I remember, so I didn't actually go in blind. A friend of mine kind of told me about it. I was like, that sounds amazing. Because, I mean, the events of the film, it has a bit of a, it's not a usual Western. It has some other elements in there that you're going to get. But, I mean, this is, like I said, it is a great going blind. And if you have already seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It just gets insane. It's such a original, amazing, like, movie. Yeah, High Plains Drifter, and you.
Oh yeah, High Plains Drifter. I got a poster for it in my.
Oh yeah, you do.
In my den.
Yes,
yeah, I mean, it doesn't get much more Clint Eastwood than High Plains Drifter.
Yeah. Again, I don't mean to be mysterious, but I really think if you haven't seen it, go in blind to this one, and you will not be sorry, because it's a solid movie and it has some really cool stuff in there that you will.
It's one of his best.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not a standard Western. I think that's the other thing to really look to go into. But that's my number 4, High Plains Drifter.
All right, my number 3 is Jeremiah Johnson.
I knew you. I actually thought it was going to be higher. I knew it's one of your favorites. Yeah. I figured it was going to be up high.
I love mountain men movies. You know, and Jeremiah Johnson with Robert Redford, Will Geer is in it. Came out in 1972 or 73. It was like 72. So Jeremiah Johnson is a character in the film. He was not a real person. A lot of people think there was a historical Jeremiah Johnson. Now, he is based upon Liver-Eating Johnson, who was a character in and of himself. And there a lot of mythology has sprung up around Liver-Eating Johnson with things that never actually happened according to any kind of evidence. But still a fascinating character. And the Robert Redford's portrayal of Jeremiah Johnson mirrors a lot of that mythology that has sprung up around Liver-Eating Johnson. Now, obviously, a movie called Liver-Eating Johnson probably wouldn't have made it as
1972 probably would have.
But Jeremiah, that's a different story. I love the whole, like I said, I love the whole mountain man scenario. You know, the independent trapper living free on the land. And he's kind of, they introduce the character as they don't know where he came from for sure. He was young and he came to the mountains looking to escape the world. You know, you could make up your own backstory for the guy. But a lot of good violence in that. You know, you've got a lot, you have, I believe their Crow, the Crow Nation, is sending warriors after him one at a time to beat him in single combat. And he keeps killing them. And he tries to live his life and tries to settle down a couple times, and they won't let him. And it's the whole thing. It just the scenery, of course, is fantastic, which is another reason that I like it. And Robert Redford really is at his best, I think, in this one.
Yeah, this is, I mean, so that's, Liver-Eating Johnson is one that you can, like, definitely do, like, a Wikipedia wormhole, learning about that whole thing, and about you know, he's an interesting, colorful character. You could see why they would make movies about this. And then also, I know this one is very important to you because, I mean, you've spent a lot of time, you know, like, you had spent time trapping, and you have a, when you're younger years, you know, had the like to be out in the wild and stuff like that. So this is a, you know, I could see that why you would feel a connection to that character.
Yeah, and Will Geer as Bear Claw in the movie, he's like the old grizzled mountain man who kind of shows Jeremiah a thing or two. There's a scene where they first meet, and he asks him if he can skin grizz, because Bear Claw isn't a trapper; he hunts grizzly bear, and Jeremiah cockily says, you know, I can skin as many grizz as you can bring to me. And, you know, then there's a great scene there where Bear Claw basically corrals a grizzly bear into the cabin where Jeremiah Johnson is, and he yells, "You skin that one, Pilgrim, and I'll bring you another."
That's a pretty good line.
Yeah.
Okay, my number 3 is pretty well understood as one of the best westerns of all. I mean, I think here on out, you know, I mean, this is all just like, you know, it's sort of eventual. Like, you know what I mean? It's like no surprises really big. But my number 3 is The Wild Bunch, considered to be one of the greatest westerns ever made. Sam Peckinpah, who's known for his violence, you know, his excessive violence. I mean, there's a reason it's on. I mean, I don't know. What am I going to say about it that hasn't been said 1,000 times before? I will say this, and you can skip ahead 30 seconds or whatever if you've not seen the movie, but like I was talking about scenes a moment ago, and like there's a moment at the end of this movie when all these guys, you know, they know they want to do something. They know they're going to do something that's going to get them killed, and you know they just walk up to each other, and each of them in turn, you know, they sort of collect their kind of posse, and each of them in turn just looks. And they're like, okay. They don't say anything. It's like it's understood. They all know exactly what has to happen. And it's kind of about that destiny that you're like, you know, you're on a road. And it, you know, like when you pick a certain profession,
right?
You know what's going to happen. You know, if you're a gunfighter, you know at some point you're going to run out of luck. There's going to be somebody faster than you, and you're going to be dead. And you know that you're on this certain path, and you're like, this is my time. And I really love that part of it, you know. And that's the part of that movie that like I remember. And there's a couple other Sam Peckinpah movies that I considered for this list that I couldn't quite find a place for. But he's definitely, you know, maybe in the top 5 different Western directors, I think, you know, on there for sure. So, but yeah, Wild Bunch, again, what am I going to say about it that hasn't been said already? It's understood as one of the best Westerns there is.
Yeah. So Wild Bunch didn't make it onto my list because in addition to kind of separating out the genre by what was Western and what was period pieces, I also had a 19th century versus 20th century cutoff. So any film that was done or that was set in the year 1900 and after, I didn't consider for this list. And that would include films like The Shootist. Have I already said this?
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
But The Wild Bunch is one that was set, you know, in the 20th century, along with, what was the other one that you had? Last Man Standing.
Yeah. That one was definitely, you could have chastised me for that one.
Well, it's my rules, not yours. You know?
It's like Carlin. They're my rules. I make them up. I make them up.
Right.
Your number 2, Brian.
My number 2 is a film. I don't know if you're going to see this coming or not. Number 2 is Barbarossa, with Willie Nelson and Gary Busey.
Yes. Okay, so actually, not to cut you off here, but as we were talking, I was like, wait a minute. There was that one that we watched together. You showed me this movie.
Did I?
And I remember, and I forgot completely about it, and I remembered it as we, like, I don't know, somewhere in your list I remembered it, and I was like, oh yeah, huh. I remember that, and I was like, should I put that on my list? And I just was kind of thinking about it. Yeah, it's a really great movie. Yeah.
So Barbarossa, 1982, Willie Nelson, Gary Busey.
Yeah.
Didn't get a lot of theater play, and didn't get a lot of critical acclaim, and I blame that on the studio mostly for their handling of it. I first became aware of the film on watching an old episode of Siskel and Ebert when they were both alive and well.
Interesting, yeah.
And they were reviewing this film. They both gave it a thumbs up, and I thought, I'll have to see that. You know, I'm not the biggest fan of Willie Nelson as far as his music goes, so I was a little skeptical going in of whether he was going to be able to pull off a Western character. But boy, does he! So this is I think it's a very underrated film, and it's one that hit me hard because I saw it blind, and that's some of the best.
Oh, that's
some of the best films you'll ever see.
Really, the only way to watch a movie, I think. Yeah.
You know, so he's this thief down in Mexico, former Texas Ranger, known only as Barbarossa, which is Redbeard, of course, in Spanish. And that's what the Mexicans call him. And he was attached to a family down in Mexico with a lot of ties and a lot of wealth. But he was kind of cast out from them for something that happened on his wedding night. and I won't tell you what that is. You can watch the film, but suffice it to say, there's enough humor and chemistry between Busey and Nelson to keep this thing going. There's a great whole, story about epic or about legend and the kind of effect that has on people, and not just legend but legacy. Barbarossa is a person, but he is to the people in this film almost a mythical character now, a mythical, almost divine character, because he has these little tricks and these little things that have happened that kind of makes him look like he is immortal. Yeah. And at the film's end, that just kind of gets perpetuated by Gary Busey's character, and leaving you to assume that Barbarossa is going to live for a long, long time with this particular family.
Well, I mean, that's that's a big part of the West, is you're forging your own legend, right? Like, right. I mean, Jesse James. I mean, there's all these like big name, Billy the Kid. There's like Pat Garrett. There's all these like big name people that are like, I mean, who knows how much of that is true and how much is not and how much is tall tales. But that is a really huge part of the West, right? And of course, Barbarossa being a fictional character and not based on a historical character, but that's kind of a large, part of that whole thing. I remember really enjoying this movie. And it's funny because I'd completely forgotten about it until we got about halfway through your list. And I was like, oh yeah, and I was like, that's probably going to be on Brian's list. And I was like, should I put it on? But I did really enjoy watching it, and I think you've shown me quite a few good movies that I think you were. Okay, so my number 2, as already mentioned as well, one of the best movies ever made, hands down, and that's of course Unforgiven. So I often talk about how much I love the idea of like you get into a genre and you get the movies that make the genre, that make the cliches, that make the genre what it is. You get your Dawn of the Dead, your The Night of the Living Dead, and that makes the zombie genre, right? So you get all these movies that make the genre. And then at some point, the genre gets tired, you get all the cliches, you get all the copycat movies, and then at some point, you get sort of the anti-genre movies. And this is sort of like an anti-Western, which is why you were talking about you didn't enjoy it when the first time you saw it, but they turn the entire genre on its head, essentially, and you get the seedy the bad underbelly, the bad part of like hey, you're these glorified killers and things, but that's not really this is not glamorized. This is like, and I mean, you get performances and you get some of the greatest lines, some of the most, I mean, just and the raw acting talent in here. I mean, this is a movie that I've seen probably 100, I don't know, like I've seen it an absolute ton of times. It used to be on HBO all the time, and I watched it over and over and over again, and it's just, it's hard to imagine a better, to me, like, I mean, there's only one, I mean, this was an easy, like, it could have been, I have a number 1, of course, but, like, it's hard to imagine really anything unseating this one for me. I mean, it was an easy number 2. I mean, I think it's like I can't gush enough about this film.
When I first saw the film, I think I was too young to appreciate a deconstruction of something, and so I didn't care for it, because here's my favorite gunslinger, wallowing in pig manure, and getting picked on or these poor.
The idea of like somebody that's a complete killer and essentially maybe a villain in some of these movies, and then they're now trying to redeem themselves, and that the redemption story, the anti-hero, these are all very important ideas. It's such a fascinating thing. Now, I'm going to mention a movie, The Searchers. It's not your number 1, is it?
No.
Okay. So what's interesting here is we were talking about a little bit about Clint Eastwood and John Wayne, and what's so funny to me is that, like, I just missed the John Wayne boat. I never watched a single John Wayne cowboy film, with the exception of one, and it's The Searchers. And The Searchers is sort of what Unforgiven is to the rest of the Western genre, Searchers is to John Wayne's career. And it's sort of ironic for me to have seen the one movie about John Wayne that's like the anti-John Wayne film. And so it's the only one I've seen, so it's a little bit of ironic. But yeah, it's interesting that it's not, I mean, you didn't have any and I don't have any, right?
No, the Shooters would have made it.
Yeah, right. You had mentioned that before. Yeah. It's just interesting since he's such an iconic. I mean, you think of the West and you think like, well, John Wayne, you know. But I think for me, maybe just for my age or whatever, I missed the boat on that.
It's the same way. My dad, huge John Wayne fan. I mean, but those are his westerns.
Yeah.
They don't resound as much with me. I went to see She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, which is a John Wayne film. And I could not wait for it to end. And it lasted so long. Yeah. It was so just... so I don't recommend that. Don't recommend She Wore a Yellow Ribbon.
So I have a feeling I know which number one is since you hushed me earlier on one of them. But yeah, go for it.
The Outlaw Josie Wales is my number one Western of all time. And that is for a lot of reasons. But I think mostly... it's a chapter movie, okay? It's very linear. There's no surprise ending. There's no twists. You know, it kind of just proceeds. But each chapter, you can anticipate. You look forward to seeing it again. You know, whether it's him versus the Comancheros, or him talking to Ten Bear, or Lone Waddy trying to kill him the first time, and he sneaks up on him instead. You've got the two farmers who try to sneak up on him in the brush with the kid, and try to collect him. You got the two wannabe mountain men at the store who try to collect him.
There's a lot of mountain men on your list.
It's just a lot, and then it kind of winds down toward the end, with them fighting off some hostiles, and he kind of settles down, but dying ain't much of a living.
Yeah, that's one of the best lines. Like, I mean, it really is one of the greatest Western lines there ever was. Like, he's like, "Got to make a living." He's like, "Dying ain't much of a living."
Yeah,
I'm about to murder you. So you're not making a living, buddy. Like, you're gonna.
And a little interesting trivia. I don't know if you know this or not, but the day Elvis died, this Outlaw Josie Wales was playing in a loop.
I had no idea.
On his television. He had like a reel-to-reel copy of it. He and his Memphis Mafia had been watching it over and over again.
That's a weird factoid.
It is a weird factoid, but we learned that on the tour we took of Graceland several years ago.
Yeah,
and they still have it playing down there, as part of the. That's
interesting. Imagine you die, like, I mean, we wasn't planning on dying, but imagine you die in some movie that maybe you don't really like, was like on some loop or something, and like people are like, hey, Brian Easton died, and like Hairspray was playing. I don't know, some random movie.
Yeah.
My number one, hard to imagine movie, sneaking past Unforgiven, but to me this is the quintessence. I mean, whereas Unforgiven is the anti-Western, this movie embodies completely the Western. And this is Once Upon a Time in the West. This is Sergio Leone's masterpiece. This is like a 3-hour-long movie. You've got Morricone, I think his best score, which is saying a lot. I mean, he's the master, right? Sure. And you've got Harmonica, who was played by Charles Bronson. And then you've got Henry Fonda playing the villain of the movie.
Which is against type.
Yeah. And, you've got just their themes and things. I mean, the first 10 minutes of and this is not a movie for everybody. Like, the first 10 minutes of the movie, there's, like, these guys just sitting and waiting for the train to show up. Yeah. And they're, like, trapping a fly with their gun and, drinking water out of their hats and stuff. So it's paced, like, very slowly. But I mean, like, the ending, the finding out, the mystery of the. I mean, it's not a huge mystery, but like when you find that out, it is just one of the most impactful scenes that you will see in a film. The gunfights. I mean, it has everything you want in a Western. I mean, it is just, like I said, it's a masterpiece to me. Like, it's the quintessential Western. So that, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you do. So that's Once Upon a Time in the West. And
that's one of those films that really use the oversaturation of color, I thought, especially with the eyes of Henry Fonda.
Oh yeah.
They're like shining crystal blue, And like I mentioned, when you were talking there, Henry Fonda playing a villain is very against type for him. He always plays the good guy, and maybe that's one of the reasons I didn't particularly embrace the film because I never really bought Henry Fonda as a villain. As good an actor as he is, and as much as he sold it, it was like watching Tom Hanks be the villain in Road to Perdition to me. I didn't buy. I'm sorry. I don't buy that you're the bad guy. Sorry. You can kill everybody. You're not a bad guy.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, I thought he did a great job and it's funny that you mentioned the eyes because he does have those like piercing eyes. But yeah, that to me it's. I mean, you're not beating that movie. I mean, I love Bronson. I love Charles Bronson. I think he's great.
Oh, he's great.
Very like he's very like under under the surface, and his performance is great. He plays that harmonica, that theme. I mean, it's in my head right now. I'm listening to that theme. It's so good.
Did you ever see White Buffalo, the Western with him?
No, I have not actually. Okay. I should see.
So he plays Wild Bill Hickok in that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Bronson plays Hickok and in search of a legendary white buffalo. Anyway, it doesn't make the list, but it's all right.
Okay, well, that's our 10 best Westerns. That sounds weird because of the hotel. Yeah. Those are our top 10 Westerns pre-2000.
Pre-2000.
And we're here with, thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
And if you like what he has to say, or you like his, you like the cut of his jib, you can check out his show, Whiskey with a Werewolf Hunter, or check out his books, Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter. That's a series. The 6 books soon to come out. If you like me and you like board games, I'm a frequent guest over at Co-op for Two. That's linked below, as well as if you like war games, I have Wachacha's Wargaming Journey. Where you won't find me, however, probably is social media in the comments below. I'm not very good at that, and I do apologize. But I hope you did enjoy the our discussion today, and look forward to a link here. You'll see up on the screen here. You'll see our companion piece to this, which is Westerns post 2000. So, and again, thank you for the whiskey. It's like sort of like a when in Rome. You have
right, yeah.
It's very delicious. See you on the next episode.